Welcome everyone to the Sun Safety and Skin presentation for BayCare Presents. Uh, we are so happy that you're here to join us today, as well as Dr. Patel. Dr. Patel specializes in adult and cosmetic dermatology. Her expertise is in the management of all adult dermatologic issues, including skin cancer, surgical dermatology, and inflammatory skin conditions. Her approach to cosmetics is in creating a highly personalized experience for patients that treats every aspect of the skin to meet the patient's unique needs. Thank you, Dr. Patel, for being here today, and the floor is yours.
Perfect. So thank you for having me. I am so excited to give this presentation. It's on a topic that's very near and dear to me. And so we'll get started. So the topic today is sun safety and the skin. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background on an introduction and history to sort of sun worshiping, sun tanning, things like that, because it's definitely evolved over time. So there is evidence that even ancient civilizations, such as the Egyptians, back even before the pyramids were built, sought protection from the damaging effects of the sun. And the concept of excessive sun exposure as unhealthy or at least cosmetically unacceptable did spread to Northern Europe, especially among the aristocracy. The reason for that is because um, during like the Renaissance period and the periods after that, the few centuries after that, it was considered quote unquote common to have a tan because it meant you were a laborer who worked outside. So people could base your socioeconomic status on sort of how pale you were. And then sun avoidance continued into the 19th century until the period of the Industrial Revolution. So, at the turn of the 20th century, the image of tan skin as aesthetically pleasing began to emerge. I'm not sure how many of you might know who Coco Chanel is, but she's a French designer, and she was often has been credited with developing the concept of tan skin as beautiful because she used to have all of her clothing models tan after World War II. But later in the 20th century, we also saw the recognition of sunburn as a bad effect of UVB. And we discovered that UVC and UVB induced DNA mutations cause cancer. So then UVB was established as a carcinogen. So, in terms of sun exposure, in the 90s, serious efforts were made by the government to educate the public about the damaging effects of sun and tanning beds. I have a lot of patients who tell me that from the 80s and 90s, they had at home tanning beds, which now you would never really see happen. So, despite the efforts of the education, because I'm sure you guys see all over the place, like avoid the sun, wear SPF, things like that. Recent studies show that although the population of the United States understands the effects of sun, people don't necessarily change their behavior because, of course, changing behavior is the hardest thing to do. So, especially for teenagers and adolescents, they continue in the studies to seek a tan through both natural and artificial exposure. So the most recent survey shows over 20 million Americans go to tanning salons every year, and only 33% of people typically reapply sunscreen every 2 hours, which is what's recommended. And then 42% usually put on sunscreen and never reapply it at all, or they reapply it only when they get wet. And then 30% of the population applies sunscreen just to their face instead of applying it to all other areas of their body. So, on to the kind of the skin safety part and the education part. So, what is SPF? Right? What is that? What does that number even mean? So, the FDA's meaning in kind of colloquial terms is it's how well a sunscreen protects you from sunburn. So, to simplify things, the way I kind of think about it and explain to patients is that sun protection factor is what SPF stands for, and it is a sunburn protection factor. So, for example, it allows you to understand how many times longer you could be in the sun with that level of SPF before you would get a sunburn. So, we'll go into that a little more. So one of the most confusing things about SPF is the number that follows it. What does that even mean? So the number tells you how much UVB light, and I think of UVB as UV bad. Those are the bad burning rays that cause most skin cancers. And it's the number of how much that sunscreen can filter out the bad light. So when you have SPF of 15, that is filtering out 93% of the sun's UVB rays. So you are still getting 7% of those rays onto your skin. SPF 30% filters out 97% of the sun's UVB rays. And so that's why the American Academy recommends using an SPF of 30 or higher. But it's important to know that no matter where you get with sunscreen, whether it's SPF 50 or 100, which does exist, although they've banned or they've stopped allowing people to really say SPF 100, no sunscreen is going to be able to filter out 100% of those UVB or UV bad rays. So this is a little bit about kind of decoding a sunscreen label, because when you're going to the store, there's so many options. And personally, even I used to get very confused until I underwent my training, because what do these terms even mean? You read a lot about it in the media, every magazine has recommendations. And I just kind of wanted to give you guys a broad basis of how, when you look at a sunscreen label, how does it apply to you? What is, what do the terms actually mean? So broad spectrum, we hear that a lot. So broad spectrum sunscreen is a term that's used on sunscreen labels to indicate that the sunscreen actually protects against two types of ultraviolet rays. So we already talked about UVB, and those are the UV bad rays that cause your skin to burn. However, we also have in our light spectrum UVA rays, and I consider that UVA like aging, because the trend is in the population, people are more and more concerned about the effects of photoaging due to sun damage. And so the UVA rays, or the UV aging rays, are the ones that cause premature skin aging, wrinkles, and age spots. So both types of rays are proven to lead to skin cancer, but UVB is mostly the one that is the carcinogen. UVA is the one that mostly ages you. So when you see broad spectrum, it means you're protecting against both. So there's a lot in the media these days also about chemical versus physical sunscreen. So what does this even mean? Each of these protects your skin differently, and they have different active ingredients. So chemical sunscreen is like a sponge. It actually absorbs the sun's rays. Its active ingredients that have been splashed all over the media have been oxybenzone or avobenzene, and there's a few other chemical ingredients, but those are the two that have been most recently the most controversial. Now, physical sunscreen, what is that? The way I think of that, and I remind myself of it, is that's when you remember the lifeguards with kind of the white cast on their nose. That is titanium dioxide or zinc oxide. So physical sunscreen acts like a shield. It protects you by deflecting the sun's rays. So chemical absorbs like a sponge, physical protects like a shield. So some sunscreens use both types of active ingredients. So they contain one or more of both found in physical and chemical sunscreen. And when you look at this sunscreen, you just flip over the back and it'll literally list on the top the active ingredients. So the only two real physical ones you'll see is titanium dioxide or zinc oxide.